Uddhava uvacha atatena anugyata Bhaktva pitva chavarunim Taya vibramashita gyana Duraktair mamur paprishu Uddhava uvacha Uddhava said, Atha, thereafter, te, they, the Yadavas, tat, by the Brahmanas, anu gyataha, being permitted, bhuktva, after partaking, pitva, drinking, cha, and varunim, liquor, Taya, by that, Vibramshita Gyanaha, being bereft of knowledge, Varutahe, with harsh words, Marma, core of the heart, Pashprishu, touched. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thereafter, all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmins, partook of the remnants of prasadam and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking, they all became delirious and, bereft of knowledge, they touched the core of each other's hearts with harsh words. Responsively, thereafter, all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmins, partook of the remnants of prasadam, and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking, they all became delirious and bereft of knowledge. They touched the core of each other's hearts with harsh words. Purport: in ceremonies, when Brahmins and Vaishnavas are sumptuously fed, the host partakes of the remnants of foodstuff after the guest has given permission. So the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja formerly took permission from the Brahmins and ate the prepared foodstuff. Kshatriyas are permitted to drink at certain occasions, so they all drank a kind of light liquor made of rice. By such drinking, they became delirious and bereft of sense, so much so that they forgot their relationship with one another and used harsh words which touched the cores of each other's hearts. Drinking is so harmful that even such a highly cultured family becomes affected by intoxication and can forget themselves in a drunken state. The descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja were not expected to forget themselves in this way, but by the will of the Supreme it happened, and thus they became harsh towards one another. The verse again: thereafter all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmins, partook of the remnants of prasadam and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking, they all became delirious and bereft of knowledge. They touched the core of each other's hearts with harsh words. Mukam karoti vachalam pongam langayate girim yat kripataraham bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. There's a statement in one of these sandarbhas that even more painful than an arrow that strikes the body and moves towards the heart are harsh words. The harsh words affect the heart in a way that's more painful than arrows piercing the body. It's also stated in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter somewhere, that austerity of the speech is involved in speaking words that are pleasing, beneficial, not agitating to others, and always quoting from Vedic literature. That's from the Bhagavad Gita. So by the arrangement of the Supreme Lord, the descendants of the Yadu dynasties and others became intoxicated and used harsh words and annihilated one another. The background of this story, for those of you who have read further in the Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think 11th canto, there was a trick played by the descendants of Krishna. I think it was Samba, who dressed as a woman in a sari and used a large metal sphere in his stomach to convey pregnancy. And so in a joking way they asked the sadhus or the sages what is going to be the fate of this child, which wasn't a child at all. It was actually a round stone. But the sage kind of knew what was going on, and he said to the jokers that this will be this pregnancy, so-called, will be the cause of the annihilation of your whole dynasty. So these words were taken very seriously, and they realized that this was not a joke, that they couldn't play a trick on these sadhus. And I think it was Ugrasena that pulverized the stone and made it into powder and threw it on the river or ocean, so that it was completely deteriorated. But what happened was, in course of time, the particles grew into rods, iron rods, and they were used by the descendants to strike one another and annihilate one another. So this was the arrangement of Krishna, that these descendants of Krishna were too powerful to be killed by anyone else, so they killed each other. And they did it in a drunken state. They issued harsh words, and these harsh words penetrated their hearts, so much so that they engaged in very violent activity. In Kali Yuga, harsh words sometimes erupt into major conflicts, even into warfare. It's a very difficult thing to understand how these harsh words can penetrate, but they can penetrate, and in this age they can evolve into warfare, as we have seen in the earlier parts of Kali Yuga. There has been massive warfare. World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and various civil wars have caused a number of people to die because harsh words were spoken. So Prabhupada brought a whole culture to the world. He didn't just bring philosophy, but there was a culture. And the culture consisted of words that were gentle. Instead of saying, had an affair with, he said, was implicated with. And words like samosa and pujari and other words, jalebi, that we commonly use are pretty much unknown to the general public, because they're part of the culture of Krishna consciousness, and the mode of dress that was unlikely. And people often thought that we were the people who wore pink bed sheets on the streets and chanted with pink bed sheets, because they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what a dhoti was. They didn't know what a sari was. Those were all the words that were unusual and unfaithful, and pronounced in a different way. And Prabhupada, even though he pronounced some words differently, we kind of knew what he meant when he said ritual in Vietnam and Philippines. We kind of knew what it meant, even though it wasn't exactly pronounced the way it was pronounced in the United States. But that was the culture of Krishna consciousness. There were many things that were part of the culture that were brought to the West that were unknown to people. And the culture of cows was brought forward from probably from India. That they were unusual animals. They were not ordinary animals, and they provided a substance that was very beneficial for human beings, a substance called milk. And that milk is a very powerful substance, and books have been written about it, but there's a movement to stop all consumption of milk and dairy products, and it's become very popular. so much so that even Hare Krishna restaurants have to cater to such people who are against taking dairy products. But those who are protective of cows and bullocks and are affectionate towards them know that there's something special in these products. And even in India, in Mayapur especially, they make medicines out of cow dung and cow manure, and sell them to the local villagers of West Bengal who are very steeped in the cow culture. They know that these things are beneficial, even though they taste a little bit weird to us Westerners. And the West is so polluted that things that are made from byproducts of cows, like cow manure and cow dung, are not allowed even into these countries unless they're specially packaged and dehydrated or especially mixed with other products that are somewhat sufficient. So the culture of Krishna consciousness is very strange to the United States. There was a big protest against the Krishna movement when it first started in the first few years, because people looked different. They were wearing pick bed sheets on the streets. They were singing strange songs. They were doing strange. They looked different. They were shaving their heads. They were wearing clothes that didn't look familiar. And so there was a great movement against this. It started with, it was called the deprogramming movement. Prabhupada knew that this movement existed, and he knew that it had started from the parents of devotees who were very shocked that their own children were wearing different clothes, were embracing a different philosophy. They were doing something really different, and they had started a whole movement. So this movement had a turning point around about 1976. There was a case. There were a number of cases where devotees were actually kidnapped, sometimes by criminals. And it was finally brought to a Queen's appellate court, and the judge said that, in his judgment, said that the Hare Krishna movement should be respected, and it's part of a religion that goes back thousands of years in India. And he wrote a very nice comment, and it was on the front page of the New York Times, and it reached the Times of India. And Prabhupada had this judgment read to him. Not the judgment, but the newspaper article that had words, parts of the judgment in it. And he commented that what he thought would take 50 years or 100 years took only 5 or 6 years. That it was like the turning point. It was a point of acceptance of the Hare Krishna movement. There was a television program called The Lou Grant Show. It was very popular in the United States. It was sponsored by the CBS television network. CBS was one of the 3 major networks. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. It was before the CNN or the Krishna or the CNN, the cable news network, came into existence. And so this happened just after in 1976, just after the Lehigh judgment, the judgment of the Queen's. His name was Judge Lehigh, Leahy. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's expired now. But it became a turning point. The story is that the person who wrote the initial script, her name was Michelle Gallery, and this was shown here in the temple, by the way. A bootleg copy was obtained by some people whose names I won't mention, but it was completely illegal, but it was shown here in the temple because CBS is very, very strict about violation of their copyright laws. So this program, which was an hour long, was broadcast in the temple. And the story behind it is that the person who wrote the initial script wrote the script in a way that wasn't exactly favorable to the Hare Krishnas. It made them look kind of strange. And the story was that Ed Asner, who was the actor, that's his name, Ed Asner, I don't think he's alive anymore. He was the religion editor of a newspaper. And this newspaper was kind of what we call a knockoff or a replica of the Los Angeles Times. But it wasn't called the Los Angeles Times, it was called something else. So the editor of that newspaper had a dilemma. The dilemma was that his own son had become a Hare Krishna. So the religion editor asked him what his problem was, because he was acting sort of strange, because he knew him, he knew the editor. And so he said, well, I instead of telling you what's going on, I want to show you what's going on. So they got in a car, and the editor of the newspaper drove the religion editor to this place in the center of the city, and where a group of devotees were chanting. And on the end of the group was the son of the editor of the newspaper. And he said, that's my son. That's the problem. And he thought that his son had joined a strange cult. And he wanted the religion editor to give his advice on what to do, or what could be done, or if anything could be done. So that's the story. But the person who wrote the script was rejected. And the script was rejected, and she was terminated because they thought that her writing was insufficient. So she quit the company in Los Angeles and went to Denver, Colorado, which is about 1,000 kilometers away, and rewrote the whole thing, and came back to the Lou Grant show and said, if you like the script and if you accept it, I want you to accept me back into the company. So they read the script, and this script was very favorable to the Hare Krishnas and very unfavorable to the people who are against the Hare Krishnas. And she was very much a stickler for accuracy. She wanted everything to be completely accurate, because it was a national television program. It lasted for about 1 year, and it was broadcast every Thursday night for 1 hour. It was very popular. It's called the Lou Grant Show. Ed Asner played the part of the guy named Lou Grant. Anyway, they looked at the script and they thought it was well written, and they accepted it, and they accepted her back into the company. But she was very much a stickler for accuracy. So she was in contact with me several times by telephone and wanted to know what she should call the son, because he got his name changed, the son of the editor of the Los Angeles Times. So we talked about different names, and finally we agreed upon the name Vishnu Das, that he would be called Vishnu Das. So a strange thing happened one day. They were filming in the temple. I mean, talk about accuracy. This person was so keen on being terribly accurate that it was arranged that they would film inside the temple room in New Dwarka. And in New Dwarka, where they filmed, they paid the temple $5,000, which was a lot of money in those days, $5,000 US. This was in 1977. This Vishnu Das was sitting, the actor, had shaved his head, and he was sitting on the stoop in front of the temple, smoking a cigarette. And we drove by and kind of thought this was kind of humorous, that here's a Hare Krishna smoking a cigarette, because smoking cigarettes is forbidden in the Hare Krishna movement. So that happened. But the deprogramming movement didn't take the whole thing very kindly. They kind of got wind of the fact that this new script was favorable to the Krishnas and unfavorable to the people against the Hare Krishnas. So they decided to write to all the sponsors of the Lou Grant Show. And the sponsors were very big companies like Prudential Insurance. So they wrote to the heads, the CEO of Prudential Insurance and a number of other companies who sponsored this program. They said that if you allow this to go ahead, it will be a very, very much of a black mark on the CBS network and on the program itself. So we didn't know, and it was approaching, the day was approaching. It was Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and we didn't know. We kind of got wind that the deprogrammers were against this program going to air. They wanted to change it, or they wanted it to be replaced by something else. So we didn't know what was going on. But because the United States is divided into 3 different time zones, something like Australia is divided into different time zones, the first broadcast was in New York, which is in the eastern side of the country. And the father of the head of the temple in New Dwarka phoned him and said that now this has been broadcast just the way you wanted it, and your movement has become popular, and the deprogrammers have become unpopular. So as a kind of unforeseen situation had arisen, the devotees in Los Angeles in the New Dwarka Temple started to celebrate, to jump for joy, because they knew it was being broadcast. It was in a different time zone. And when it came to Los Angeles, to New Dwarka, it was enacted with the entire new script. And the entire new script made the deprogrammers all look like criminals, and the devotees looked like very innocent, saintly people. And so we watched it and thought it was a very good presentation, very accurate. And we saw that some of it was filmed in the temple room. So the whole thing was kind of there was the judgment by Judge Lehigh, and a few weeks later this program came about, and it was another major turning point in the acceptance of the Hare Krishnas, at least in this country. It was not complete acceptance, but it was a step in the right direction, a step to acceptance. And it was broadcast, and that person stayed in a member of the production team of the Lou Grant show, and it went on. But it was a major turning point. Even though it was a fictional sort of broadcast, it was a broadcast in favor of the Hare Krishnas. So that was the major turning point. It was, and Prabhupada was very pleased with the judgment. And when this thing came about, he was informed about it, about the Lou Grant show, and he said that was the kind of the final blow against the deprogrammers. That they had made a movement, that they had organized this thing so well that they even had big meetings where there were 400 or 500 or 600 or 700 people in Southern California, which in a city called San Diego, which is a very conservative city. There was a military installment there, a Navy. It was considered a very conservative city. In fact, the movies that were made in Hollywood were tested in one of the cities that they were tested in was San Diego, because San Diego was known as a very conservative place, and the audience were asked to fill out a form saying what they thought of the program, what they thought of the movie, if they thought it should be released or changed or whatever. So even though it was a very conservative city and the deprogrammers were very organized, and they had meetings in big halls, in big auditoriums with hundreds of people present, and we had but devotees were aware of all this. We did a little bit of espionage work, to be blunt, and sometimes devotees wore wigs, and they went into their meetings incognito and found out what they were doing. And they also had their espionage crew that sometimes infiltrated the Hare Krishna movement, and they found out what we were doing. So it was kind of like a Keystone cops and robbers type of situation that was existing. But anyway, that was the major turning point. And now, in this country, in Australia, and in the United States, and at least in most of the United States, we're accepted. One of the ways that I found out that we were accepted was after this broadcast happened, I decided to, not decided, but part of my mission was to go to St. Louis, Missouri. And the only way I could get to not the only way, but the best way to get to St. Louis, Missouri was to go to an airport in what was called Burbank, California, which is just north of Los Angeles. So I had to wait in a long queue to get on this airplane. And while I was waiting in the queue with my danda and shaved head and devotee clothes, there was a couple standing next to me, or right behind me, or right in front of me. They were a little bit shorter than I was, the man and his wife, and they were older than I was. They were in their 50s, and I was probably in my early 40s, and they were maybe in their 60s. And I thought, uh-oh, they're going to get on my case now that I'm carrying the staff, and I'm wearing shaved head, and I have pink bed sheets on. And finally, the man turned to me and he said, he looked me up and down. He looked up and down at my gunga, at my danda, and he said, "Going fishing?" So I came to realize that people in the Midwest part of the United States, like Missouri and places like that, they're kind of innocent. They don't really know what's going on. But the people on the West Coast and the East Coast were very, very violently opposed. Anyway, that's actually something that really happened in the late 70s. So are there any comments or questions? I'm happy to do my best to give answers. On one thing that Prabhupada mentioned, and that's kind of interesting in the purport, is that drinking causes people to emit harsh words towards one another. And it's kind of interesting that liquor has been legalized, been allowed for many years, whereas things like marijuana, which are comparatively a lot less harmless, are illegal. When I was younger, I used to go to, in Oregon, it was, liquor was banned, or it was only sold in government offices, and I used to go to that place with some ID that made it look like I was a little bit older, and would get liquor from them. And then when I first went to California, I realized that liquor was available everywhere, in drugstores, in supermarkets, in shops, just everywhere. So I thought that was very beneficial. But it's turned into a nightmare, because people all over the United States now, and that law in Oregon was changed so that now liquor is available everywhere. They're causing harsh words to be emitted to one another, and sometimes there is warfare, clan warfare, and even civil wars sometimes exist. And that's part of the age of Kali. And it was sort of begun when Krishna left the planet, when he arranged for the Yadus to have this rice liquor and to annihilate one another. So warfare and a semblance of argumentation had begun. As soon as Krishna left, that was the beginning of Kali Yuga. So we're living in an age that's very opposed to the Krishna movement, but in a way we're advancing. Like, it's been 50 or 55 years since the movement started, and having entered the Sydney Opera House, we've shown that we are people that can deal with things in the Kali Yuga and are not affected by it. Hare Krishna. So that's the end of this. Is there anything anyone wants to ask or say? Yes.
I see, Maharaj, when you mentioned how wars come about, it's due to nasty politics and things like that. Even the Second World War, part of it was because the West wouldn't accept Japanese culture as being equal to the Western culture. So they were always very pejorative towards the Japanese, which is one of the reasons that the Japanese sort of got into the Second World War, just because of words.
Thank you. Yes,
Maharaj, I did hear, it was in the 70s, I can't remember if it was Sydney or Melbourne, but there was one undercover policeman whose job it was to infiltrate all these different groups and make a report, just so the government knew what was going on. So this one man, he joined the Hare Krishna movement for that purpose, and he actually met Prabhupada. He even got initiated at one stage. And after a few months, he just sort of disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. And then he turned up a few months later at a Sunday feast, and I said, "Oh, where did you go?" And he revealed that actually I was undercover, and I was just, that was my job. And he said, "Anyway, don't worry, I gave a favourable report." He said, "Of all the different groups that I've infiltrated, the Hare Krishna movement is the only one that actually touched my heart." That's what he said. So.
Thank you very much for that. The Prabhupada also tells of an incident that occurred it was in Melbourne. The officials were very inimical towards the Hare Krishnas, and they even put them in jail sometimes. And then Prabhupada got a notice from Madhuvisa, who was the chief Hare Krishna in Melbourne, although he's from Boston originally, that the chief archbishop of Melbourne, he's a Catholic, said that these are good people, you shouldn't harass them. And so from that point on, the government and the people in general stopped harassing us. That's the incident that Prabhupada relates. Thank you very much. Anything else? So we'll stop there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.